Good morning. I'd like to call this August 26th meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority to order. It is 9:02 a.m. First item on the agenda, is there any public comment, Mr. Tejas?
Yes, sir. We have one signed up, but that's for the streetcar project, so I imagine you'll want to take that with that item.
If that would be okay with the person that's here, we'll wait till we take up that issue. And I'm sure members have had a time we need to, item number 3 is adoption of minutes for our CRRMA board meeting of August 12th. Do we have a motion?
Move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Here we go. Item number 4 is presentation, discussion, and action on the following board resolutions as they relate to the El Paso streetcar project. Item A is a resolution selecting the apparent best value proposer pursuant to the CRRMA's request for proposals for rail vehicle procurement issued on February 17th, 2015, and authorizing the executive director to negotiate an agreement with such proposer. And item B, resolution selecting the apparent best value proposer pursuant to the CRRMA's request for proposals for construction of the infrastructure component issued on June 19th, 2015, and authorizing the executive director to negotiate an agreement with such proposer. Mr. Tejas.
Good morning. Raymond Tejas, Executive Director of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. So as was read into the record, we're talking about the streetcar project today. A very exciting day. We have two big items. So what I've done is I've developed a single PowerPoint for both, and we'll go through that. And obviously stop me along the way should you have any questions. We have today with us also Chuck Berry, who's been the project manager from formerly URS, now AECOM. So if we have any technical questions, we can bring him up as well. Excuse me. So what we're going to talk about today is really broken into 3 separate areas. The first is the procurement process itself, and you'll notice we actually broke this procurement into 2 procurements. Then we'll talk about the vehicle procurement process and timeline, and then we'll get to the apparent best value proposer on the vehicle component, and then we'll get into the infrastructure, the process timeline, and also the apparent best value proposer on that one. So as I mentioned, there were 2 distinct procurement processes that we utilized here, one for the vehicles themselves and one for all of the remaining infrastructure. So the infrastructure includes everything from the maintenance and storage facility, the tracks, the power stations, and everything associated with running the program. The vehicle component is literally just the vehicles. It's the existing PCC vehicles that the City of El Paso owns, and that contractor will take those vehicles to their facility and completely remanufacture those. So we broke those out, and just by way of background, when we first inherited this project, we issued a request for information. We had a number of meetings and discussions with industry folks that were interested in potentially bidding on these projects. And the initial comments that we received, among all of the comments that we received, the one unanimous point that we heard from everybody was that we really needed to separate the bid into a vehicle and an infrastructure component. So that's what we've done. So the vehicle procurement actually included a request for proposals, and we'll talk about that in a second. The infrastructure procurement actually included a request for qualifications, and that was the first step intended to identify high quality firms that could pursue the project. And what the board actually did at the completion of the RFQ stage was shortlist a group of 4. So originally there were 6 interested firms that were looking to bid on this particular project. We went through the RFQ process, and the board shortlisted 4. And from those four teams then received the request for proposals. And today we're here to go through the results of the request for proposals. The board identified the selection criteria and scoring for each procurement, and we'll talk about that as we go through. And each procurement included an evaluation committee to develop a recommendation for board consideration that we have today. The RMA board will select the vehicle and infrastructure contractors, and that's what we're doing today. So the vehicle procurement process and timeline. February 17th, we issued the request for proposals. On May 6th, We completed the question and answer period, which included several addenda that we issued related to that RFP. By May 21st, we had received one submittal, and that's from Brookville Equipment Company. By July 22nd, we began negotiations with Brookville, and today I'm asking the board to select the vehicle contractor, which would be Brookville Equipment Company. Now, I need to talk about this a little bit because it is a bit unique. Within the RFP that was drafted for this particular procurement, there's a provision that says if there's only one bidder that submits, the RMA is authorized to sit down and negotiate with that single bidder. Otherwise, we would go through the normal process of having the 80-20 breakout and the best value determination. But because there was only a single bidder, we retain that authority to do that. So that's what we've done. And of course, all of this was in conjunction with and reviewed by legal before we went forward with any of those steps. So the actions that I'm requesting today really consist of two distinct motions. So the first would be to authorize the issuance of a notice of intent to award to Brookville Equipment Company pursuant to the request for proposals for rail vehicle procurement for the El Paso streetcar project, which we issued on February 17th, 2015. So the first one really is the notice of intent to award. And the second motion I'm requesting is a motion to authorize the executive director to finalize and execute an agreement with Brookville Equipment Company for the remanufacture of the city's PCC streetcar vehicles in amount not to exceed $19 million. So what that $19 million actually gets you is 6 vehicles. And those vehicles, as I mentioned, are the vehicles that the city of El Paso owns and has out at the airport property. Those vehicles will be taken by Brookville. They'll be completely remanufactured, taken down to their base components and remanufactured from the ground up. I'd mention also of the 6 vehicles we've required, and so I should mention too, going back in time, the specs that were developed for the vehicle procurement were done in coordination with Sun Metro and the city of El Paso. So everything that we're doing here is on behalf of the city of El Paso, so all of the negotiations, all the discussions, all of the specs, everything that we've done to date includes Sun Metro and specifically Jay Vanashak, who's the director of Sun Metro. So back to the 6 vehicles. One of the vehicles we've actually retained, specifically vehicle number 1511, which is an historic vehicle itself, because that was the one that was regularly painted by hand by Jose Cisneros. So we've isolated that one. We've required the company to take that specific vehicle, and we're actually going to use perimeter seating, much like we had originally running back in 1970 for the 1511. It'll be much like a ceremonial vehicle, actually. So 1511 will retain that historic designation. The remaining vehicles then will have the regular forward-facing seating, and they will look they'll be a little more modern. But again, these remanufacturers, this process is to get them the original PCC vehicles to run like new, but to look the same as they did back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when they were running here in El Paso. I'd mention also, so we are acquiring 6 with the $19 million, but Sun Metro's priority number 1 is to add a 7th vehicle if possible. So what we will be doing is monitoring, obviously, the vehicle contract as well as the infrastructure contract, and when we hit the milestones on the individual contracts, and we're able to free up contingency funds, the priority number 1 from Sun Metro has been to bring in that 7th vehicle if possible. So that's what we're going to be doing through the management of these 2 contracts.
Raymond, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is that a new vehicle, or is that another refurbished vehicle?
It's another refurbished vehicle. Yes, ma'am. So the entire fleet, whether we end up with the 6 that I'm asking for authorization to contract for today, or if obviously I would come back to you with a change order for the 7th. Any and all vehicles that we develop through this project would be the original PCC vehicles, and that's by direction of the City Council.
Mr. Tejas, is there a representative here from Brookville Equipment?
I don't believe so.
I have a question. I'm concerned at 6 vehicles. We're talking in excess of $3 million a piece to refurbish vehicles. They have inspected the vehicles.
Yes, sir.
And are comfortable. The biggest enemy to this entire project, as we have all discussed and the public is aware, is change orders. Mm-hmm. So they're comfortable with those numbers? Is it the same amount for each vehicle, or are there different vehicles that require different amounts of retrofitting?
So it's a bid on, originally the procurement went out for 7 vehicles. So the bid was received for 7 vehicles, and the negotiations that we entered into was to get to a certain number so we could make the entire budget of $97 million work. So to get there, we had to remove one of the vehicles. But ultimately, there's a price per vehicle that we've negotiated with them. And in fact, the way that this agreement will be structured is that it will be an agreement for 6 vehicles, but they will hold firm the price for the 7th for a set period of time, within which we're hopeful that we can free up those contingency funds. But ultimately, to answer your question, yes, they are very comfortable with the numbers that they've provided, and we've discussed them at length and in great detail. We've actually sat down with them to talk about the line items that in their pricing that they've submitted. So we're very comfortable that they can get it done for the $19 million, and they are as well.
Mr. Tejas, do you have monies set aside as a one contingency fund for both components, or did you set aside contingencies for each area?
For each. So the way that the vehicle agreement is structured, and so we're using Locklord, our outside counsel, to structure both agreements. The way that they've structured it is that it's really, these vehicles are as is where it is. So they literally are tasked with coming down, preparing them for shipping, stripping off wood and anything that could fly off on the road from here back to their facilities in Pennsylvania. So they're required to come down, and it's literally as is where it is. So we had a site visit. They were able to get up on top with ladders. They got underneath. They've looked at all of the vehicles, and at this point, it's literally going to be up to them which of the 6, other than number 1511, it'll be up to them to select which of the other 5 that they're going to take. So I hope that helps. But yes, absolutely. We've built in contingency on the vehicle side, and we have a separate contingency on the infrastructure side.
What is the contingency on the vehicle side?
$500,000, and that is based on the fact that this is as is where is. So if they find something cracked that they didn't realize, that's entirely on their side. They have to deal with that. So the contingency that we retained on the vehicle side is for owner change orders, owner-driven change orders. If we want to upgrade the type of seats that we want, that sort of thing.
That's pretty skinny.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question?
Ms. Hiner?
Mr. Tejas, good morning.
Good morning.
I have a question as to why we only had one bidder, and why is that possible? And then I also want a little bit about the history of this company. Have they done this type of project before? Have they refurbished these type of older vehicles? If you could give us a little bit of information about that. I'm a little concerned that we are only dealing with one person.
Certainly. Well, I think that the answers to your 2 questions are actually linked. The reason there was only one bidder is that this is a very unique vehicle, the PCC vehicle. And Brookville is actually the firm that has done the PCC remanufactures for, I want to say, San Diego or San Francisco. In other words, they are the known expert for PCC remanufacturing. So yes, they've done, not only have they done a number of streetcar projects, they've done several PCC-specific projects. So that's really the answer. Now, during the site visit, we actually were visited by 3 separate firms, but Brookville was the only one that actually submitted.
Then just one more question. With regard to the contract price of $19 million, what is the warranty that's included with that in terms of, mechanical breakdowns later? And is there any maintenance that's involved past that warranty that would be involved in that money, that amount?
Let me ask Mr. Berry to join me. There he is. So he can give you some of the details on the warranty
Yeah,
side.
thank you.
Now, actually, as he comes up, I'd mention also the contractual terms. I'll provide those to you before I actually execute, so you'll see all of these laid out. Really, the point of today is to issue the notice of intent to award, and then authorize me to get to that next step. But so you'll be provided with all of these details.
Thank you.
Good morning, board members, chair. My name is Chuck Berry. I'm with AECOM, formerly URS. I am your project manager on the streetcar project for both components, the vehicle and the infrastructure project. For the vehicle project, the contract as written now, the RFP requires that the vehicle remanufacturer provide a 3-year warranty period. And part of what's being negotiated right now, it does include an on-site representative component, and one of the negotiation items is how long that on-site warranty representative would be available to the Sun Metro folks who are going to be operating the system. This is post-delivery, and the warranty includes 36 months, and it includes some piece of on-site representative. There's also, prior to accepting the vehicle, there's a pretty thorough testing period, and not only of the vehicle itself, but how the vehicle interacts with the City of El Paso's infrastructure part, the rail and the power system principally. So there's a couple of places where you're checking the vehicle, and before you're even accepting it, this team will be involved with the RMA's GEC in accepting that vehicle.
So is there anticipated there'll be some training with the Sun Metro
Yes, ma'am.
team so that they can take over the maintenance after those 3 years? Or
Absolutely. There's three main parts to the vehicle contract. One is the direct cost of each one of the individual vehicles. Another part is all the engineering and system support, training, development of operational manuals for each of the components, training of the Sun Metro staff who will be maintaining the vehicles. And the third piece is somewhere on I don't remember the exact dollar value. Another piece of what's being negotiated is what's called capital spare parts, very large component spare parts that might take Sun Metro a year to acquire should they order another set of wheels and trucks for the car. So they will have an appropriate size inventory for these very special components of the vehicle so they can keep them operating. So there's those three main pieces. And it's not just buying the cars, it's buying the engineering behind remanufacture along with all of that systems and training and operation support, and also the spare parts.
Thank you. I think that's really important for everybody to understand. It's not 19 million, 3 million per car. It's all of this that comes with the operation.
You really cannot get a car without the other pieces. So yes, ma'am, it's all together, and we couldn't separate one from the others. But you're buying a vehicle with a warranty and a support system and training and an owner manual behind it.
They'll all have air conditioning, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, good.
I think that was discussed for a little while, and I said, I'm not taking that item to the board, pulling air conditioning out of these cars.
let's
They
not
did
do
not,
that.
historically, they did not have air
what I
conditioning.
was worried about.
So it will be retrofitted on. They're also pretty substantial modernization of the braking system and other components. So you're not getting a refurbished car. We've gone instead to call it a remanufactured car. It's not just a rebuilt vehicle.
Thank you.
Mr. Parker?
As I remember from past briefings, the cost of the cars was supposed to be somewhere around 1.2 to 1.4 million, depending upon whether we remanufactured the shell of the existing streetcars. And as I understand, we're only going to use the shell. Is that true? More or less? Or
No,
are they
sir.
going to use
It's
some
not.
of the existing
It's not.
undercarriage?
The undercarriage, a lot of that is going to be reused, but the housings will be reused. The wheels will be new. The axles will be new. The braking system will be new. But the housing for the trucks, it's hundreds and hundreds of pounds of cast iron. It's going to be reused, but it's like an old battleship. You don't get rid of that part.
Sure.
The major parts of the shell will be reused, but there's also going to be major parts that need to be rebuilt.
Okay.
There's a specification that says if there's more than a specified amount of deterioration on the body, then the whole section gets replaced.
Right. It seems to me if those figures we were given previously, when we also approved the project to go forward, are correct, then we're really spending about 1.7 million, más o menos, per vehicle on the ancillary things that you described. And I understand why all of them cost money, but I know originally we were talking about 8 vehicles, now we're talking about 6, and perhaps a 7th. I'm just wondering, how high the price tag really is going to go on this thing. I was comfortable with the 1.2 to 1.4, but now it's like going to buy a car. All of a sudden, here's your basic car, but if you want air conditioning, if you want a radio, if you want tires, it's going to cost you a lot more. And that sounds like what we're getting into right now. So I question the 19 million total amount. That's the sum total of it. So
That is the total. It's not to exceed that amount. And that is correct. For 6 vehicles, the engineering and the spare parts, the
how much is the rest of the project going to cost us then? All included, all the accessories, tax, title, license. How much is the rest of this project going to cost us?
okay, and I think that's the second part of the presentation.
Well, I
for the
understand,
vehicle.
but one goes with the other, does it not?
Yes, sir. And that's, I think that's one of the reasons that RMA is bringing you, the board executive director is bringing you both of them together, because we needed to know that both parts would work together, or the project, you could not do one part without the other.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to vote on both matters at the same time rather than do these separately.
I don't think that's a problem.
Can I?
Ms. Yanier?
I'd like to get that answer. I think that's an excellent point. I wasn't aware of the original estimated cost. Can you tell me how we got from that number to where we are now and the breakdown? I think that's important to know.
We have 97 million, period.
Okay, so I was, excuse me, I was conferencing
okay.
with Mr. Berry. I don't remember bringing a number to the board. I don't think we ever did that. Mr. Berry recalls bringing a number to the city council when they were deciding which vehicle to go with. So that may be what you're referring to, and I know that at that time they brought a number less than $2 million for a type of vehicle. I think it was maybe the replica.
I think that was in response to one of my questions, and if you like, we can go back and review the minutes.
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that.
But
so
that
so I can get that.
was 6 months or more
Okay.
ago.
So I can tell you, and so in direct response to the question, the budget is 97, and it has always been 97 million in construction funds from TxDOT. So what we had to do is put out these separate procurements to make sure that they both fit under the 97, and they do, and this is how it fits. So the number of vehicles from our end has always been we always had access to 9. The procurement went out with 7. The hope was that we were going to be able to afford 7. We ended up with 6, with the idea that with the contingencies that we've put to the side, once we pass the milestones, we'll be able to free up some of those contingencies and bring in the 7. So that would get us back to the 7 that we were originally planning to acquire.
Remy, I'm sorry, but still not answering my question of if we had why are we so off on the estimate that we did present to council and responded to the question 6 months ago? If that's really the case, I mean, did we look to see what they cost, what other cities paid for similar types of streetcars? I mean, I'm a little concerned.
Mm-hmm. So I'll ask Mr. Berry to talk about what he presented to the council and that sort of thing. Maybe we can start there.
Okay, thank you.
Is this recently, or when did he present it to council?
Chuck Berry again with AECom.
Right.
This would have been back in 2012.
2012.
Yes, sir.
All
And
right.
at the time there was, let's see, I think the question is, maybe make sure I understand the question. Why the differential between a number that had been presented before and the present number that's being presented to the board? There is a difference, and it was on the range that Mr. Parker is mentioning. That I recall a number of about 1.6 million. It could have been maybe 1.4 for the cost, the estimated cost, anticipated cost for a fairly much off-the-shelf replica vehicle, which would be it'd be very much different from the PCC vehicles that we're remanufacturing today. The URS estimate for the vehicles that you have, that you're considering today, was approximately 1.6 or so per vehicle, with a lot of assumptions. And Ms. Geiner asked about, Ms. Hiner asked about other cities and their costs. There were not a lot of data points out there. We had to build a zero-up cost estimate, and we were pretty confident that our cost estimate was at the time, about a year ago, accurate for the time on what it would cost to rebuild that vehicle. In fact, in the marketplace, we received a different number than that, something more on the order of $2.6 million per vehicle instead of the $1.6 million per vehicle. So there was a difference between what we were estimating about a year ago and what we saw receiving the vehicle prices from the one bidder. I think that addresses your question.
It addresses my question, but it just raises my concern about how we're, over 30% higher than what we estimated a year ago. Raymond, on this motion, when you send the notice of intent to award, is there still some discussion that goes back and forth? Do we get to see? I would like to see the itemization of these costs and get a better handle on it, because I really think Les brought up some good questions that at least I'm not aware of that history, so I'm just fairly new to the board, and I'd like to know that.
Certainly. I can share with you the price proposal, and I think that would answer your questions.
I'd also like to know what the original proposal contained that was approved by our city council. I'd like to know how many vehicles, the approximate costs, everything, so we can compare and contrast to what we now have to ensure that we're effectively addressing the will of the people.
So I can address that now, and I can share with you the minutes from the city council item when this was presented. What the council approved was the style of vehicle, the PCC, meaning that they selected the PCC over the replica. They selected the route, in other words, and in fact at that time they reduced the length of the route, and that was pretty much it. So the point was, go build the system. They didn't identify that we wanted X number of vehicles. They didn't do any of that level of detail. They literally said, this is the route that we want, and this is the type of vehicle that we want.
That is truly astonishing.
Well, so our task was to develop a system with the $97 million to figure out, and we've gone through the process to figure out exactly what that system is going to look like.
After we developed that, did we go back and seek council's approval?
No. We were granted the authority to go build a system for $97 million with the assignment of the URS agreement and that sort of thing. So there was no additional approval required. At this point, it was literally given to us to go build the system for $97 million.
That's a wonderful gift. Here's $97 million. We wanted to look kind of like this. Go build that house for us. Interesting. All right.
Mr. Tays, I have an additional question. I know that on the infrastructure component, there are performance bonds that the contractor, at this point, I don't believe that the board has any information about Brookville Manufacturing. Are they required to put up some type of bond, performance bond?
Yes, payment and performance bonds at 100% of the project. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Ms. Hunier, do you have one more?
No, I mean, maybe later. I'd like to hear the other part of the
Okay. Certainly.
This one's- Go ahead, Mr. Tays.
Okay, so that was the vehicle side. So let's get into the infrastructure. So here's some history on the infrastructure side. January 20th, we issued the request for qualifications. And as I mentioned before, this was a two-step process, an RFQ to identify a short list of firms that were qualified to develop the project. So the RFQ was issued in January. By February 19th, the RFQ responses were received by the RMA, and as I mentioned, we received 6 responses from 6 interested firms. March 3rd, the RMA board identified a short list of 4 from those 6, and June 9th, the request for proposals was issued to those 4 shortlisted firms, and we'll talk about them in a second. By July 31st of this year, the question and answer process and several addenda had been issued, so that Q&A process was complete. August 4th, the RFP submittals were received, and those were, again, for the 4 shortlisted firms. August 20th, the evaluation committee meeting was held for a review of the technical component. And August 26th, which is today, I'm asking for the board to select a best value proposer. The 4 shortlisted firms are listed here. Jordan Foster serving as a prime, Paso del Norte Track Works, which is a joint venture between Granite Construction and Railworks Track Systems, Stacy and Whitbeck, and lastly Sunt Herzog, which is also a joint venture between Sunt and Herzog Contracting Corporation. This is the scoring criteria that the RMA board approved on May 7th. There's a pass-fail component of the RFP that is reviewed, and then the scoring is actually broken into the price proposal, which accounts for 80% of the final score, and the technical proposal accounts for 20%. This is the evaluation committee that actually scored the technical side. So Jay Benashak, who's the director of Sun Metro, who's here, by the way, if you have any additional questions of him. He served on the committee. Kevin Bunce, who's the assistant director of maintenance for Sun Metro. Joe Chase, who is the engineering project manager from the city of Houston, served, and he was particularly helpful because they just went through this process in Tucson in implementing their system out there. James Gravener, who's part of the Lomorado group, who's actually has many years of experience in the streetcar projects, building cars and building projects as well, served. And lastly, Fred Lopez, who was a new addition. You may recall under the RFQ process, Irene Ramirez, who was a former city engineer, served. She has left the city, so Fred Lopez has taken her place. He's the Capital Improvement Department Director for the city of El Paso. So that was the evaluation committee. Here are the final scores. As you'll note, the technical scores are listed in the first row, the price proposal in the second row. Once you add those points together, then you come up with the final score and ultimately the ranking. So the ranking includes Paso del Norte Track Works as number 1, Stacy and Whitbeck as number 2, Jordan Foster as number 3, and Sunt Herzog as number 4. So, and I should have mentioned, of course, as we do with all procurements, after the board meeting, I will post this PowerPoint online, so it'll be available to the public. So I'm requesting 2 board actions for this particular item as well. And of course, as Mr. Parker mentioned, we could take all of these action items as a single motion. But I'm looking for a motion to select the Paso del Norte Track Works joint venture as the best value proposer in response to the request for proposal for construction of the infrastructure component of the El Paso streetcar project issued by the RMA on July 31st, 2015. The second motion I'm asking for is to authorize the executive director to finalize and execute an agreement with the Paso del Norte Track Works joint venture for the construction of the infrastructure component of the El Paso streetcar project in an amount not to exceed $64,174,174. Now, I need to break down that number a little bit for you because that number is actually all inclusive of, so let me take it back a step. The way that the RFP was issued, we actually had a base bid, which is all of the elements necessary for the project. So that includes all the actual track work, the power stations, the maintenance and storage facility, and really everything you need to run an operation. Then we had base bids 2, 3, and 4. So base bid number 2 is water work that the water utility needs done as part of this project, and they will be paying for that out of their own funds. So that would be base bid number 2. Base bid number 3, which is the wastewater services that are necessary that the water utility would also be paying for. And then base bid number 4 then is Central Business District 4 improvements, and that would be paid for by the City of El Paso. So a little history on that one. The City of El Paso has been developing these projects identified as Central Business District projects. Phase 4 is the latest one, and that will come in about a year and a half, if I remember correctly. There are certain improvements that they will be making to, that would be Father Rom and Kansas streets that actually are the same segments, are part of our project as well. So what we've done with the city is we've offered to them the inclusion of base bid number 4. They would pay us for that, and they would do all of the improvements as part of our project. So base bids 2, 3, and 4 would be paid for by either the water utility or the City of El Paso. So they're included in the $64 million, but they're not actually being paid for by the RMA project funds of $97 million. Okay, so I need to mention that. And then one other item, which is referred to as the add alternate list, and those are kind of a wish list of items, and those include things like additional amenities at the stops, trees, and additional lighting and that sort of thing. So not needed items, but wanted items. So that's included in that number as well, but the contract won't actually include those unless and until we actually identify those as basically change orders to be brought back in. So that accounts for the $64 million. Back to the original question of the total project budget. So the total project budget again is $97 million. What we would actually enter into in terms of the contract with Paso del Norte Track Works would be for base bid number 1, which is $54,554,196.07. And then once we negotiate and enter into agreements with the City of El Paso and the water utility, then we would also activate base bids 2, 3, and 4.
I have a couple of questions. Is there a representative here from Paso del Norte Track Works? Can you ask him to come up? And you can answer my second question.
Yes, sir.
Because of our concern. Do you have an estimation of our fees continuing as part of this project to, is it AEM now, Mr.
AECOM?
AECOM and Atkins?
Yes, sir.
And our overhead?
Yes, sir.
For the project?
And all of that is within the $97 million. And what I can do is I can provide you with a breakdown of the total project budget that shows you the vehicle side, the infrastructure side, and then the administrative costs as well.
Okay, the reason I'm going to ask the representative from Brookfield some questions, I know that the selection committee was privy to a lot of information, but I think the public may have some questions about this company, their last major project,
Certainly.
the change orders involved. We won't get real technical, but I think those are pertinent questions since they are the successful bidder. Would you step forward, sir?
Good morning, Board. My name is Anthony Alfonso with Granite Construction, part of the Paseo del Norte Track Works team.
I've got it. What was the
Questions?
last streetcar project that you built?
We built the Tucson Modern Streetcar project with a vast majority of the same team.
Okay, so I know it's not relevant to this, but just for the public, do you remember what the bid price was on your portion? Did you build the infrastructure portion of that project?
We built the infrastructure portion of that. It was $55,875,115, if my memory serves me. A couple of differences are we did not purchase the special track work units or the substations. Those were purchased by the City of Tucson. So that's kind of the major differences.
And I know it's not relevant because it's apples and oranges. Were there a lot of change orders in that project?
Yes, sir.
What percentage? If you were to tell me off the top of your head you had a $55 million contract, what was the amount of the change orders in that project?
On that project, roughly 15 to 20%.
How much, please?
15 to 20%.
So a high of about $10.5 million. Okay. Those were my questions. Do you have, members of the board, do you have any questions?
Does that company itself, the joint venture, have history for these types of projects, or is it created just to bid on this particular project for El Paso?
So the joint venture itself is an individual company, but both Granite and Railworks, we were the Old Pueblo Track Works was the joint venture we operated on for the Tucson streetcar project.
So you've worked together?
Yes, we have.
in
And
that
like
project.
I said, it's a majority of the same team members, actual people on the ground.
The change orders that you, again, probably not relevant, but I'm just interested in the change orders that you had for Tucson. Would you say those were more for unforeseen conditions on the side, or how would you categorize those if you had to kind of put a label on them?
A majority of them were for unforeseen conditions, and then there were also some, just some upgrades throughout the infrastructure that were completed as well.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Tez, the concern of the board,
I've got some questions.
for him or for Mr. Tez?
No, he can
Okay.
sit down.
Yes, sir.
The reason that we're asking these questions, I mean, you've done a great job on this putting this together, but some of these things need to be vetted out here.
Of course, absolutely.
There was a project downtown to redo streets that ended up in a gridlock with the city of El Paso. I think TxDOT was part of that project because of unforeseen situations where the contractor basically threatened to walk off the job because of the number of unforeseen circumstances that they discovered and the city's unwillingness to pay the additional cost, and finally it got done. But we're talking about very old infrastructure downtown, and that's probably a concern of myself and some other board members, that we could possibly run into the very same situation they discovered in Tucson. You have very old infrastructure, lack of specifics to where utilities and water and sewer and some of these are, and it's kind of like you start digging a hole and oops. We're real concerned about those situations and our ability to handle the cost overruns. And while it is a different city and it's apples and oranges, we are concerned about being able to meet our financial obligations, because we know that there's not one additional dime for this project.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So I share your concern, and it's been a concern since day one with not only us, the city of El Paso before us, and certainly with Chuck Berry and his team as well. So what I'd ask is Mr. Berry to touch a little bit on the way that the utilities are being done separately and in advance of the infrastructure group coming in. I want him to talk a little bit about some of the early work that we've done to try to identify some of those normally unforeseen conditions. So
I think Mr. Parker has some questions of you. Do you want to ask them now, Mr. Parker?
I'll wait.
Thank you. Mr. Berry?
Board, Mr. Chairman, Chuck Berry again from AECOM. Mr. Tejas has asked if I could talk with you about what we have done in advance during the design of this project and the planning of the El Paso streetcar project to help manage those unknown unknowns, is what some people have called them to date. One of those is definitely potential, could be utilities, unknown utilities that people don't know are there and possibly could still be active. Another item of concern that we addressed early was unknown vaults, unknown basements under the sidewalk, and we worked to manage those unknowns. And then also the unknown for the detail level in the plans, to make sure that there was enough details in the plans to address elements that were potentially variable from what all the investigations could determine to date. And those are probably the three major categories of work that we tried to prepare for in advance with these plans. On the utilities, we've done, I think we're on our third year of coordinating with the El Paso utility companies, including the franchisees, Texas Gas and El Paso Electric. In addition to the water utilities is actually included in the contract for their adjustments. That's bid packages 2 and 3. That will help to manage a lot of their own unknowns, that they are actually included in the plan set, and their work will be constructed by the firm that the board selects to do the El Paso streetcar project. And then there's the telecoms, the telecommunication companies like AT&T, Time Warner Cable, and 3 or 4 others. We've been coordinating with them for the past 30 years during this, and even more so this last year, to try and identify all of them, and it's been a very elaborate and detailed process. We think we know where, if they know where it is, we know where it is. And the only ones left are if by chance one of the utilities doesn't know where one of their utilities are, and it's going to happen. We're just trying to minimize that risk. If they don't know where it is, then we may not know where it is. So we've been coordinating with the utility companies because that's a significant element of your project. A lot of that work is already included. There adjustments, relocations that we've identified that we cannot design around will be completed on or about January of 2016 in advance of the contractors' forces getting out there and starting to do their work, other than the water work that's included in their plan set. The other item was basements and utility vaults that could potentially get in the way. So we did a couple of different things on that. There was a pretty thorough review from the city records, which did not turn up a whole lot of information. But we also hired a ground penetrating radar team to go out there and scan both sides of the sidewalks where we're going to be installing some pretty significant foundations for the power system, the OCS poles on the project. We're going to be poking up almost 500 holes in the ground for the 4.8 mile length of the project. I think it's 480 something 36-inch drill shafts. Mr. Alonso could probably tell you the exact number and the exact length. I'm not able to tell you that today, but it's about 500 holes. That's the order of magnitude that we're talking about. So we had both sidewalks combed. All the OCS poles fall in the sidewalks. With the ground penetrating radar, we were able to find some more locations that we were not able to identify through the record searches. And then absolutely every surface feature that identifies the potential for a basement, like some of the common features are a grate and on the sidewalk, some kind of ventilation grate, a steel grate, or one of the other elements is some of the glass block for lighting into the underground facilities. All of those were mapped. So we're pretty sure we know where most of those items are. And for the ones that we are not, we've informed the selected contractor that any work to adjust for those would be on a force account basis. We basically pay for the time, the equipment, and the materials necessary to do the work, because they would have to be addressed as you go along. And then finally, the contingency that we've set up for the project is one of the ways to address for those. I think I addressed the major elements of potential unknowns out there. We're aware that the CBD projects in the past, and I think Chairman Wardy was possibly referencing one of the CBD projects that they experienced a lot of trouble trying to build the city streets. We've built flexibility into your specifications and your plans, and we've done a very thorough job of trying to identify what could possibly get in the way out there to make sure that it's addressed in advance rather than on the spot, to minimize those risks. But they will happen. They're going to happen. Downtown is 400 years old, and the infrastructure is a couple of hundred years old. Where you are building the maintenance and storage facility, I think this was pretty cool. Where you are building that maintenance and storage facility is actually the first power station location that the El Paso Streetcar Company built on. And we are removing some of the cisterns that were under the ground so we can put the building there. So there's a lot of history downtown. We're aware of that, and we work to manage those risks, but they're still out there.
Any other questions for Mr. Berry? Thank you, Mr. Berry. Mr. Parker?
I have a couple of questions. First, I'd like to say, Mr. Tejas, Mr. Berry, all the staff, you've done a remarkable job, and we're very pleased with that. Now here's the other hand. You do have penalties built into the contracts. Is that
Yes, sir.
true?
Yes, sir.
And unlike other projects in the city, plazas, things like that, we would immediately exercise those penalty clauses if this goes beyond?
Certainly, but actually there's a process that we would implement long before we got there. So there's scheduling that's involved in projects of this size, where we work with their schedulers. We identify what is supposed to happen in what particular weeks, and you normally have like a 2-week look ahead. So you'll be talking today about what's going to happen in the coming 2 weeks. If that schedule starts to slip, we'll know it then. So all of that scheduling is built in, and the construction management side, which we're using the GEC for, we'll be tightly monitoring all of that, so that you don't just end up all of a sudden past the due date. You will know long in advance. So we'll be dealing with that as we go. And we've followed similar procedures with the Americas Interchange project, where we came in early and under budget. So I think Listen, there are lots of unknowns, and certainly we could get into a situation where we run into some problems downtown. But I can tell you that we've built a team that has the expertise to manage this as best as we can, and we will certainly be watching schedule.
And may I presume, which often is wrong, that city traffic and transportation has been busy developing a plan that they will put into effect when this infrastructure starts going in, and also after the streetcars begin running. And the reason I ask this is I noticed when the city was redoing the 2 railroad bridges so far, that traffic and transportation seem to have great difficulties in coordinating downtown traffic being rerouted and such. So
Yes.
my question is, are they ready? And have you checked with them?
So we have, but more importantly, we are ready because we're the ones that are actually implementing the work. So what we do and what we require of the selected contractors is to develop a traffic control plan, and that plan is reviewed and approved by our construction management team. And most importantly, I think, which will be an important key for this project because of its location and because of the length of it. Honestly, it's going to be pretty difficult at times. A really big important of that is outreach and making sure that the public is aware of what we're doing and, more importantly, when, and knowing in advance. So we've built, and we've spoken a little bit about this by email, the RMA actually retained the public outreach component. We've retained that because we feel it's more important that we control it, that we control the message, and more importantly, we control what the messages are and when we're talking about traffic control issues and when we're talking about closures and that sort of thing. So we've retained the PR component to make sure that everybody knows. The City of El Paso actually now has a new team that deals with traffic issues and construction projects and that sort of thing. So we're already plugged in with that team as well. So we'll be sharing information with them and certainly with TxDOT as well. So first is knowing what's happening when, and that's a responsibility of the contractor being overseen by our construction manager. The second component is then sharing that information with not only stakeholders like the City of El Paso, TxDOT, and others, but also sharing that with the public, and we're handling all of that through the PR side. So I think we've developed a plan to address that as best as we can. Now ultimately you're talking about a 4.8 mile stretch that we're going to be tearing up for a couple of years. Now it'll be the segments will be broken out, so we won't tear up the whole 4.8 miles at one time. But there's going to be some difficulties at times. But we'll make sure and share all of that with the public. But part of the public outreach plan includes meeting with all of the stakeholders along the route, and that's not only meeting with DMD, Central Business District, and the Central Business Association, and the organizations, but also meeting with the businesses along the route. So that's built into our outreach plan as well. So I think we're prepared to deal with this as best as we can and share all of the information with the affected folks.
I know this organization strives to be a good steward of public funds. So my question is, when you have the excess, and I'm sure you will, what do you intend to do with that?
So priority number one for any remaining funds will be bringing back the 7th vehicle. And then the next priorities are built into what are referred to as the add alternates. And I can share that list with you as well.
Now, and the last question I have, I believe, much to everyone's relief, is can you confirm, assert, and absolutely pledge to us that this project is what City Council wanted and intended when it passed this in the first place?
So let me answer it this way. So when we first inherited this project, the first thing I did was go back and watch the City Council meeting where they identified the route, they identified the type of vehicles and all of that sort of thing. So that was the first thing that I did and that our team did. And the intent behind that was to make sure that when we started this thing, we were doing exactly what the council wanted. So I can tell you everything that I have been involved in to date has been under the direction given by the council action of 2012 or whenever it was. So I can tell you, yes, everything that I've been involved in to date has been within the parameters set by the City Council action of 2012.
Okay.
I hope that answers it.
Any further questions, Ms. Yanier?
Mr. Tejas, You didn't give us the exact numbers, but I want to know, was there a big spread in the bids of the 4 bidders in terms of the amounts? I think that's an important thing for us to know.
Sure, I can share that with you.
Thank you.
So the low bidder, as I mentioned, the numbers that I'm going to lay out here now are the base bids 2, 3, 4, and the ad alternate. So it's all inclusive. If we had all the funds available that we needed to build it, these are the numbers I'm sharing with you. And these numbers are actually what drove the points granted for the 80% price proposal. Okay, so the low bidder, again, Boston Norte Track Works, was at $64,174,174. The next lowest bidder was, which was Stacy and Whitbeck, came in at $66,875,762.60. Bidder number 3, which was Jordan Foster, came in at $69,396,305.80. And the fourth bidder, which is the Sun Herzog joint venture, came in at $80,573,846.66. So the range was low bidder at $64 million, the high bidder at $80 million. So roughly 64, 66, 69, and 80.
We had 2 bidders kind of in the same, which is good. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And then I have a couple more questions the way that's being done. You talked about, I don't call them add-on or bid number 2 and 3 that are really PSB
Yes,
work
ma'am.
that's going to be added on. What is the arrangement that we have as the RMA with the PSB? For example, if there is a change order for an unforeseen condition that relates to their project, we're not left holding that bag for the change order. Does that go directly to the PSB, and how does that work?
So, and I'm glad you mentioned that because this ties into the conversation that Mr. Berry was having with you in terms of shifting risk. Base bids 2, 3, and 4. The fourth one is the City of El Paso. I'll be back to you with an agreement between the RMA and the water utility, and the RMA and the City of El Paso. And so these are fairly common agreements between entities. So, for example, when the city or when TxDOT is doing something, developing a project, they'll allow for water utility to add on a base bid. So it's fairly common in terms of the relationship that we will develop. In essence, what happens is the water utility provides 100% of the funds. Any unforeseens or change orders, whether it's owner-driven or contractor-driven, will be paid 100% by the water utility, and all risk is shifted to the water utility. So we're literally just almost a pass-through in that arrangement,
Okay.
both city and water utility.
And then can you walk me through, just from a budget perspective, of if we take the $19 million for the cars and then just the main bid, the base bid, taking out everybody else's components of that, what is that number?
So that's 19 and 54, right? So that's what, 73?
And what the RMA, the funds that the RMA has right now for this project is?
97 million.
Okay. Okay, so, and everything else that's being added on to make that number bigger is really coming from a third party and will be protected from not being left holding the bag for another entity. That's my biggest concern. I mean, we don't have the budget for any mistakes. We don't have the budget for a lot of change orders. I hope you hear me. And so we really are going to keep close tabs, I think, on this project.
We absolutely have to. So, and we've spoken, so our construction management team is obviously going to be watching this very closely, and they will specifically be watching not only the schedule, but that part of that review includes a review of the expenditures made and any change orders that could be coming up. So absolutely, that has to be watched very closely. And I think since day one, since we inherited this project, the concern has always been it's a $97 million figure that we had nothing to do with in terms of development. We were told, here's $97 million, go build the project, and here are the parameters within which this project has to fit. So we've been very cognizant of that fact since day one, and it continues, and it will continue throughout the rest of the project. We've heard loud and clear, and you've likely heard loud and clear from the city and TxDOT and anyone else involved, that it's $97 million and not a penny more. So we've built in contingencies appropriate to that.
Okay. And then there was a speaker that had signed up to speak on this.
Right, we'll take,
Dr. Teschner.
after we're finished with your questions from the board, we'll
For now, I
allow
think
public
that's it.
comment.
Thank you.
Okay, we do have someone that signed up, or multiple people that signed up to speak on this?
One signed up, but there may be some other folks that are interested. Dr. Teschner signed up.
Dr. Teschner, would you approach the podium, please?
Good morning, representatives. For the record, I am Richard Teschner, and today I'm representing two entities. I'm representing The building in which I live, 1800 North Stanton Street, the Fairmont, El Paso's only high-rise condominium apartment building. I sit on the board of directors and I'm the secretary, and I'm also representing our RIM Area Neighborhood Association. As you know, Stanton Street runs right through the RIM Area neighborhood. There are 8 blocks of Stanton Street on which the streetcar tracks will be built. One of my questions has already been answered. This has to do with power sources for the streetcars. Mr. Berry answered it when he referred to OCS. I'm not quite sure what OCS refers to, however, so let me turn to Mr. Berry and ask that question.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Teschner, good morning. Yeah, the OCS, I apologize for using an acronym. It's the overhead contact system. It's the wire system that's overhead that makes contact with the vehicle and energizes the vehicle.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. I grew up in the Milwaukee of the 1940s and the 1950s when we had exactly that sort of power system for the many streetcars that existed in Milwaukee at that time. My other question would be directed at Mr. Telles. He mentioned that the Regional Mobility Authority will reach out to the businesses located alongside the streetcar routes. Will the RMA also reach out to the residences along these routes, especially as represented by the neighborhood associations? And I have 3 neighborhood associations in mind. Our own RIM Area Neighborhood Association, of course, also the Kern Place Association, and also the South Side Neighborhood Association.
The answer to that is absolutely yes. So, and in fact, we've already discussed the project a couple of times. So I can tell you that that will continue. And while I failed to mention neighborhoods, absolutely the neighborhoods would be a major stakeholder because we're going right through various neighborhoods. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Telles. And my third and final question is, when is the work going to start on Stanton Street?
Mr. Tellez, are you able to address that question?
Not yet, but if we're able,
Good answer.
If we get the approvals today, we will begin the finalizing and executing of the agreements, and that should be done. Normally, it takes anywhere between 30 and 60 days, roughly, to get the insurance certificates and all that sort of thing, get all of that in place. And I believe, if I remember correctly, the schedule for the apparent best value proposer had construction starting in January. So construction activities beginning in January. So we'll have quite a bit of lead time to build up those relationships with all of the neighborhood associations, with the businesses and others, so that we'll let them know exactly what's happening next year, and more importantly, when we're touching Stanton.
So you get half an answer, Dr. Teschner, for sure next year.
Yeah, definitely, possibly, probably next year. And we look forward to your presentation before our neighborhood groups. Thank you very much.
Dr. Teschner, thank you for coming forward. Any other questions from the board? Or do we have another member of the public signed as Representative Schwarzbein? Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tace, and thank you everybody here on the board. I'm speaking here not so much as a representative, because my involvement with this project has spanned almost 6 years at this point. You can look in the lobby and you can see a mosaic that I made of one of the streetcars. And so this is a project that myself and a lot of other constituents are excited about, not just in this district, but from the city, from different generations, from people, their grandparents remember riding these streetcars when they were little with their grandparents, and looking forward to this opportunity. The questions that y'all are asking are really important. And I can tell you that about 4 years ago, about 3 years ago, I actually was still back and forth between El Paso and New York, and I actually did a road trip out to Brookville Equipment Corporation in Brookville, Pennsylvania. It's been a project that has been really important, and the facilities that they have there are top notch. They are, if you're familiar with the baseball stadium, Populous, the architects, they designed Camden Yards, they designed the new Yankee Stadium. Brookville is the Populous of streetcar remanufacturing. They've done New Orleans, they've done Philadelphia's, they've done San Francisco's. I'm not exactly sure whether there's not a representative here today, but I can tell you that they are the best in the industry. And they have been working in streetcar remanufacturing and construction for decades, I believe almost 85 years. So rest assured that I think that they're more than capable to bring our history back to life. I think that this project, aside from an economic redevelopment point of view, also is going to have a tremendous amount of cultural impact in terms of our self-esteem as a city, in terms of enabling historic preservation and redevelopment within our historic core. I think it's also going to continue to make our neighborhoods great, and switching into a position of a representative now. I look forward to working with all civic organizations, neighborhood associations, and whatever facilities I can, representing part of the district that this line is going through to make sure that this works as well as possible, and that whatever hiccups that will be there will be minimized and handled in a proper way. So I really appreciate you guys coming out here today, and thank you very much.
Representative Schwarzbein, I'm one of those grandparents. I rode the streetcars.
Do you remember where I understand they used to bump against grandparent? A couple people have said to me when they were young, they used to grab onto their grandfather's leg and stuff riding it because it could be bumpy sometimes.
I don't remember the specifics, but I do remember riding them occasionally.
Great.
So thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate you being here today. Members of the board, if there are no further questions and no further public comment, entertain a motion to approve both items.
Can I just add one thing?
Go ahead.
On the first motion that we're doing, you're going to come back to us with the specifics on, the estimate that we had and maybe a little memo from our project manager as to the distinction. I mean, I understand. I'm really happy to hear they're the best in the nation, but I still want some backup before we take a final. It's going to come back to us, you said.
Well, so the way that the motions are drafted and the resolution is drafted is that, so let's go back to it on the vehicle side.
Okay.
And they're actually both designed to be the same,
Okay.
but obviously this is up to board discretion. What I was asking for was motion to authorize the issuance of a notice of intent to award, which is really the first step to lock them in and say, okay, we're moving forward. The second motion, though, I think is the bigger one, which is authorizing me to finalize and actually execute the agreement with a cap, a not to exceed amount of $19 million. So if you're uncomfortable with that and you actually want to see the agreement before I sign it, we can do that. I just didn't know if you all wanted a board meeting to approve the execution of the agreement, or if you're just interested in the terms and conditions of the agreement. You let me know how you'd like to handle this one.
I would like to just see some of the detail before we actually execute the contract. I don't know if anybody
So
agrees
perhaps,
with me, but
so let me offer
I'm fine
this.
with motion number one.
Okay, so what if we do it this way? If you authorize both motions, I provide the terms and conditions to you, but I don't sign unless and until you have seen and reviewed them. And if I hear objections from you all, we can place it on a subsequent agenda.
I'd be okay with that.
Is that okay with?
Yeah, that would be fine with me.
Okay. And Mr. Parker, did you still want both the vehicle and the infrastructure motions to be a single motion?
No, they can be separate if that facilitates things.
Would you
you.
prefer
I
them
do
to
have
be
one-
separate
I have
motions?
one further question,
Yes,
though.
sir.
You do intend to bring significant change orders back to us? do you?
I have to, absolutely. I have
The
to.
amount, what is the threshold amount of change orders? that we can
I have no authority to make any change orders.
Perfect.
Right. Well, not
Okay.
perfect, but no, of course, absolutely. So any change orders that come up will be brought back to the board.
Okay.
Mr. Tiers, I don't know if we requested, did Brookville Manufacturing not want to attend today's meeting? I mean, maybe that's not a big contract for them.
You know, no, it is. It absolutely is. And I'll tell you, they've come to El Paso to sit down with us, that we've been on the phone a number of times. And perhaps I was clear that we were taking this item today. I don't know that I actually asked them to come. I probably should have been more
that's
clear.
okay.
I think I assumed that they would be here.
Okay.
So I can't tell you why they're not. I apologize for that. But it absolutely is a big deal for them. In fact, like I mentioned, the president of the company, several members of the team have been to El Paso a couple of times, a couple of different occasions on this particular project. So they are very excited about it.
Okay. Board members?
I move to approve. With the understanding, number two, we'll be getting some backup, and if we have further questions, we'll bring that back. So that's my motion.
Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you for your hard work, Mr. Tez. I know this has been very involved and very detailed and a lot of moving parts.
Thank you very much. And I have to, before we move to the item 4B on the infrastructure side, I do want to thank Mr. Berry and his team. They've been really good to deal with, and they've gotten into the weeds. So I appreciate that.
I think we'd second that.
Oh, so we're taking the second motion?
Yes, sir.
Motion.
So the second motion, or the second request is similar to the first. The motion to select Paso Norte Track Works joint venture as the best value proposer. And also the second motion is similar. A motion to authorize the executive director to finalize and execute an agreement with a not to exceed amount of $64,174,174. Now again, I'll provide the contract terms and conditions, and I'll speak with you all individually. If there are objections, we can certainly bring it back and deal with it.
Let me just ask for one clarification. The $64 million includes the city and the PSP components. Is the construction contract being entered now with all those base bids, and then those agreements are to be coming later? Or how is that going to work in terms of timing?
Right. So I wouldn't sign the contract with the contractor to include the base bids unless and until we have agreements with the city and the water utility, because then we'd really be stuck.
Right. I assumed. I just
Yes,
wanted
ma'am.
to make sure. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
I'll make a motion to approve item 1 and 2.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Item number 5 is presentation, discussion, and action on the following board resolutions as they relate to the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry toll facility. Item A is the resolution selecting a bidder to provide armed security guard services pursuant to the CRRMA's request for proposal issued on July 7th, 2015, and authorizing the executive director to negotiate and execute an agreement with such bidder. And item B is a resolution selecting a firm to provide janitorial services pursuant to the terms of the CRRMA's request for proposals issued July 7th, and authorizing the executive director to negotiate and execute an agreement with such firm. Mr. Tejas?
Okay, so as read into the record, we'll deal with the security guard request for proposals first. Initially, I had these PowerPoints merged, but there's been some recent developments on the janitorial which required me to separate them out. So unfortunately, I have 2 PowerPoints for you today on this particular item. But so as I mentioned, the first one is security guard. So we're going to talk about the interlocal agreement we have with the county, which gives rise to this procurement. We're going to talk about the procurement details, what we were looking for, the scoring and timeline, and the results. And I'll ask for board action at that time. So as you will recall, we have an arrangement with the County of El Paso, an interlocal agreement actually dated May 4th of 2015 that identifies the responsibilities of each party as it relates to the operation and maintenance of the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry. Just generally speaking, for the benefit of the public and certainly the board as well, the relationship that we've developed with the county is such that we planned, designed, and installed the toll collection system at Tornillo. And then there was a subsequent agreement, this one mentioned here on May 4th, which actually identified the Regional Mobility Authority as the operator of the toll facility itself. Within that agreement, as Exhibit D, there's a responsibility matrix that really breaks out who is doing what for the facility. And included in there, in that responsibility matrix on the RMA side, is the janitorial and the security guard services. So the county asked us to handle that for them. So that's why you're seeing this today. So a request for proposals was issued by the RMA for procurement of both janitorial and armed security guard. Janitorial we'll talk about next. This one is security guard. And it was based on the interlocal agreement requirements that the county passed on to us. And of course, we used similar RFPs that had been issued by other similar agencies, the city and the county. We looked at their RFPs for janitorial and armed guard services. So the details, what we were looking for in this particular procurement was 24/7 coverage, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have the ability to reduce the amount of hours if necessary or if requested by the county. Now, recall also in this interlocal agreement, this is a pass-through agreement in that the county is paying 100% of the expenses for this security guard activity as well. So if the county decides that security guard services are no longer necessary, we can, or I should say, the amount of time that they've asked for is too much, we can cut that back. We've also asked that their officers are required that their officers be licensed, go through the appropriate training courses. They must be bilingual and physically fit. And the agreement term is a 36-month term with 2 optional 1-year extensions. So that's what we were looking for. The price proposal, so the procurement scoring and criteria came before the board and was approved by this board as well. 80% of the total price, of the total scoring came from price, whereas 20% came from experience and qualifications. The timeline is there. The RFP was issued on July 7th. There was a site visit where interested firms could come out and visit the Tornillo Port of Entry on July 15th. We completed the Q&A process by July 22nd, and proposals were received on August 3rd. The evaluation committee met on August 19th and developed the results that you'll see here in a moment. I note here as well that contact was made with 19 different companies that provide these services to alert them to the fact that the RFP was being issued. So we wanted a lot of competition. These are the submittals that we received, which were 6. El Paso Finest Security Company, Fidelis Protective Services, G4S Secure Solutions, Mike Garcia Merchant Security, Ruiz Protective Services, and Vets Securing America. Now I have an asterisk on G4S Secure Solutions, as it turns out their submittal was lacking a significant number of items that we required them to provide, including the license and some other major items. So they unfortunately were disqualified from the process. So the point is that those other 5 went forward to be scored. This is the evaluation committee that was used for this procurement. Fernando Hernandez, who's the county engineer currently at the county, since he is the one that maintains their facilities, he was on. Randy Oldham, who's part of our general engineering consultant team and developed a lot of the request for proposal details. And Eddie Romero from the International Bridge division of the city of El Paso. He actually is their operations manager, and obviously he was very helpful in terms of what we were looking for, because he actually operates several bridges for the city. So it was a good evaluation committee. These are the results. In the end, the ranking came out with Ruiz Protective Services being ranked number 1, Mike Garcia Merchant Security ranked number 2, El Paso's Finest Security Company ranked 3rd, and Vet Securing America 4th, with Fidelis Protective Services as number 5. So again, you see the technical score amounting up to a total possible score of 20, with price proposal amounting to 80. And that's how we got those scores. So what I'm asking of you today is very similar to what we did on the streetcar. First is a motion to select Ruiz Protective Services, Inc. as the best value proposer in response to the request for proposals for armed security guard services for the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry toll facility issued on July 7th. And the second motion is similar as well. It's a motion to authorize the executive director to finalize and execute an agreement with Ruiz Protective Services for the provision of armed security guard services. So subject to your questions, that's all I have for you on this.
Mr. Tejas, just a question, and I guess it really doesn't matter. Everything is rolled into a per hour charge, right? So there are no additional fees or contingencies. It's strictly a per hour charge to the guard service with a regular time and overtime pay, or did they have to bid one rate to enable to protect?
It's one rate. It's a single per hour rate.
Okay. Any other questions, members of the board?
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor? Aye. Any against? Motion passes.
Thank you. So under item 5B then, we have a separate PowerPoint. And this one has, as recently as yesterday, this one has been changing. So that's why it required a separate PowerPoint. But I'll go through this as quickly as I can. It is a little bit unique though. So janitorial services is what we're discussing. We'll talk about the same things. This is the same, I think pretty much the same slide, just talking about how we retained the responsibility for janitorial services. So we issued the RFP. In terms of what we were asking in this one, 7-day coverage requested. Now, daily services were required, but the provider is not required to be on site all day. That's a little bit different. So weekly, monthly, and semi-annual deeper cleans were required, and this is also a 36-month term with 2 optional 1-year extensions. Those were the services. Scoring is the same, and again, the scoring criteria was approved by the board by board resolution, 80% price, 20% experience qualifications. The timeline is similar as well. The RFP was issued on July 7th. There was a site visit on July 15th. Q&A process was completed on July 22nd, with proposals being due on August 3rd. Contact was actually made on this one with 29 companies, letting them know that the RFP was issued and trying to solicit interest. The problem with this one was that there were no submittals received. So once the submittal due date passed, we actually made calls to specifically the firms that actually did the site visits, and I believe there were 3 or potentially 4. We actually called them and asked them why they did not submit. And the various reasons are noted there. One was that the site was simply too far. Another one noted the bond requirements as being onerous. And the third was actually there were 2 responses with number 3, meaning that they just missed the deadline. One of them, there was a funeral out of town, so they weren't able to submit their submittal. And the other one was curious in that they couldn't find the location to deliver it. So they missed the deadline on that one. So in discussions with our attorneys, because we have issued the request for proposals and that has been posted publicly and we've complied with all of the policies and laws, what this allows us to do now is if we are able to find a firm that will meet all of the requirements within the request for proposals, we're authorized to execute an agreement with that firm. So we have that ability, and we have in fact been discussing this with a group known as Mayor Janitorial Services. So that's what you see there in the second paragraph. After the phone calls, we've identified a provider that would be willing to enter into the agreement. And again, this is the important part. It's subject to the exact terms identified in the RFP. If they don't agree to any of the terms, then we wouldn't be able to execute an agreement. And in fact, that was actually a backup for us. There were really 2 plans of attack that we were going forward with. One is try to get this firm to agree to all of the terms, and if they do, then we'd be able to execute an agreement. If they had objections to any of the terms, then we would have to repost and tweak the terms and basically go through another procurement process. So we were hoping to avoid that plan B, and it looks as though we're going forward with Mayor Janitorial Services. So that leads us to the requested action item. So again, similar to the other procurements, I'm looking for 2 actions. The first is to select Mayor Janitorial Services as the provider of janitorial services for Tornillo. And again, it must be in accordance with the terms identified within the RFP issued on July 7th, 2015. And that second motion there is a motion to authorize the Executive Director to finalize and execute an agreement with Mayor Janitorial Services for the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry. So subject to your questions, that's what I have for you today on this one.
Questions?
I have a question more about the process really than this. I'm fine with this, but I understand that you want this authority and then you'll go finalize these contracts and get them signed. But is that made available to the public on our website once they're signed so they can see what they look like? And I would like to see at least a form of what bid is attached to these items if possible in the future. I mean, I'll make a motion to approve these, but I think number one, the public wants to see what the contract looks like, and then we would too. And I know there's a general form that you use, but just for future, that would
certainly
be okay.
So, and I can tell you that the contract terms, and this goes actually for all of the procurements that we've discussed today. The major contract terms are built into the procurements themselves. So when we post the RFP for streetcar vehicles or infrastructure or janitorial and security, all 4 of them, the major contract terms are actually online now. The contracts, once we execute them, we normally don't post them, but we certainly could. There's nothing prohibiting us from doing that.
I mean, I would like to see what the final looks like. So if that would be posted, I could go back and look at it. Or if you could just email it to me, that would
Certainly. Well, and listen, this is all at the discretion of the board. If you're interested in seeing a presentation from me differently, if you want to see the actual contracts, we can certainly do that. So I'm open to whatever the board is
Well,
interested
maybe
in seeing.
we'll put that on a future agenda item to discuss what the other members think. But I would like that to.
Certainly,
in the future.
absolutely. All of the information is available. It's just a matter of how much do you want and how do you want
how
to
much
deliver.
do I want to read at night?
Right. Certainly.
Okay. Well, with that, I'll make a motion to approve these.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll take them in 2 motions.
Together, please.
Okay. For both motions, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank
Any
you.
against? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Tejas. Item number 6 is discussion and action on a board resolution adopting the CRRMA budget for fiscal year 2016.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm done with the PowerPoints, so that's good, I think. Included as backup for item number 6 is a document that consists of the resolution itself that actually adopts the attachment 1, which is really, we refer to it as our budget, but it really is simply a projected cash flow statement. So I thought what I would do is highlight some of the areas that are a little bit different from the prior fiscal year. And really, it amounts to one main difference, and that is in the salaries section under the total projected expenses. Some of the board members will recall that we had an arrangement with the City of El Paso last year where they were supposed to provide an individual, a budget analyst out of the OMB division of the City of El Paso, and the RMA had agreed to pay for 1/2 of her salary, provided that we received 1/2 of her time devoted to the RMA. So that individual unfortunately left the City of El Paso and to my knowledge has not yet been replaced by the city. So whereas last year's budget had a much higher salary and fringe benefits section, it's lower this year because they have not replaced that individual and we are not paying for half of that person. So that's the major distinction that you'll see there. I think the rest of them, and also under the estimated cash, you'll see that there is an additional payment for the State Spur 601. So by way of background, with State Spur 601, which is referred to as the Inner Loop, you may recall that's the project where we issued about $230 million in bonds back in 2008. As part of that arrangement, the RMA built in an administrative fee, which is 0.01% of the total outstanding principal each year. So, of course, that goes down each year, and we receive that in 2 installments. So you'll see under the pending Spur 601 payment, the $14,000 was supposed to have been received, and it has not yet been received, so it doesn't show up in our financials yet. So that's a unique one. The CMP payments, you'll recall that when we issued the vehicle registration fee bonds for the County of El Paso, we built in an administrative fee as well, and that $11,000 has not yet been paid to the city, and to the RMA. That's simply a passage of time issue as well. And then the pending reimbursements and salaries, you'll notice $140,000 of reimbursements are still coming to the RMA. Again, that's a passage of time issuance. The way that we bill for our projects is that we receive the engineering invoices, any other consultant invoices, and then the RMA will tag on its administrative fee to that. Then we send that bill off to TxDOT, and anywhere from 30 to 45 days later, we'll receive payment from TxDOT. So we have about $140,000 that either have not yet been billed or were just billed and we haven't been paid for it. Now, I want to touch on this because this is not the same thing that you're seeing with the City of El Paso where they are disputing amounts submitted or they have issues with the submissions. We have no issues. It's simply a passage of time issuance on that. And other than that, I do want to talk because I think this may be the first budget process that that I think at least one board member has gone through. Let me touch on the projected revenue. Through the Americas interchange, there was a portion of the project that we issued debt on. It was a Build America bond for about $30 million. What we did with that one is we actually built in so let me explain it this way. With a Build America bond, you have a federal subsidy of 35% of any interest paid in any particular year. So that federal subsidy is actually, it was agreed to between the RMA and the City of El Paso that we would split that subsidy. So the RMA gets 1/2 of the 35% federal subsidy. And that's what you're seeing there for the $226,000. Unfortunately, you see the asterisk there as well, which that amount is reduced by 7.3% this year because of sequestration. Next year, it drops down to 7.1%, I believe, if I remember correctly. So it is reduced by that. However, it's still a nice amount that comes to the RMA, and it serves as really the backbone of quote revenue for the RMA. That coupled with the salary reimbursements by project. Everything else, I think we've touched on. So subject to your questions, that's in a nutshell. That's our operating budget for fiscal year 16.
Ms. Henier?
Mr. Tejas, can you tell me a little bit, when I noticed about the GEC services at $25,000 for next year, I think it was substantially higher last year. Can you tell me the distinction there? I mean, I'm happy to see it, I'm
Good
just
point.
curious.
No, you're right. That was another a big drop. So the budget that we built in last year was much higher because we were looking at pursuing the 2013 Comprehensive Mobility Plan, and we didn't have a funding source for it. So we were billing out of our operating budget. And that leads to a bigger point, which is all of this is the operating budget. So all of the projects have their own individual active budgets where the GEC hits for will be hitting for streetcar, for any of our other projects they bill outside of this. This $25,000 is really a catch-all for services on a project for which we don't have a project budget. So this is if we want to pursue something new and that sort of thing. So it's a minimal amount.
And what would fall
Intentionally.
into the other consultant services? Give me some examples of it.
So the other consultant services include, we had used in the past Ms. Terry Quesada to help us monitor the MPO activity. So we use her as an outside consultant. So
Okay.
that's the 25 that you see there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for you, Mr. Tejas. I looked at what you transmitted to the board prior to the meeting, and then since you brought it up in your budget, the fog has worn off a little. I am thinking that we should amend this to add a salary or a portion of a salary for someone from OMB, because you're going to need the help. I know that we don't have the expense now, but I think the board would strongly agree that you're going to need some support and that we should have a salary built in or whatever we had in the previous year for a 12-month salary, even though we are not using it currently, so that you have the ability to find somebody to help you.
Certainly, we can do that. We can absolutely do that. So the issue that we've had with the city is that OMB actually lost, I want to say, 2 to 3 individuals at the same time. So they're in a rebuilding phase. So I don't anticipate anybody being available to us in the near term. But I think your point is well taken. We can certainly add that here in the event that they actually get staffed up to where they can provide that half a person.
You have an amount off the top of your head that we should put in there? It doesn't have to be exact. Is it?
You know what?
Because we have to cover the fringe benefits and everything, so, possibly maybe something in the vicinity of $50,000 that we should add as the budget to be able to cover a portion of a professional salary.
So if you'll allow me 1 second, I can pull up what we budgeted last year.
And I think we probably ought to increase in case we have to go outside and have some type of contractual agreement with someone.
Sorry, just 1 second. I think I've got it.
I mean, that's my opinion. I don't know if the other members of the board share
I
my
agree.
concern.
Concur.
We discussed that. So, yeah.
One moment, sorry.
Oh, it's all right. In fact, as we develop this conversation, maybe we ought to attempt to budget a full-time person to support you, and let's see if we can,
I think that's a very good idea.
if we can make it work.
So what we did last year, for half of the time for a budget analyst, we had the salary at $30,871 with the benefits and taxes at $6,800. So we were at about $37,000.
That was for halftime, so it would not be out of the question to budget $75,000 for a full-time employee.
Right.
We can do that.
Plus the amount for benefits.
Well, I think that covers.
That would be
I think that'll
inclusive,
cover
I
everything.
believe.
I think we'd probably have to have a motion to amend your budget.
Yes, sir. To include $75,000 split among the salaries and fringe benefits.
So I would move to approve this with the change of adding a salary of $75,000, that number that Raymond said, to this budget to hire a full-time person.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. I think
Thank
we're
you.
okay with that, Mr. Tatus.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Number 7, today is the update discussion, our last item, update discussion and action on the executive director's report A is the Mission Ridge Boulevard Arterial 1, and item B is no September CRRMA board meeting.
Yes, sir. So under 7A, this is the third time I bring this back, and I apologize. This will be the last one. But I did want to update you on it because we have gotten everything we needed from the water utility. So on September 2nd, we will be advertising this one for bid, and we're excited about that one. On September 9th, we'll have a pre-bid meeting, and on September 24th, we will actually be opening the bids. So at our next board meeting, I'm hopeful that I can bring to you a request for award on that particular project. So that one is moving forward. No action required. And then B, because we've had 2 meetings in August and we've knocked out some of the major items that we've been working on, I'm proposing that we cancel a September meeting and meet back up in the usual second Wednesday of October. But no action is required there either. And so subject to your questions, that's all I have for you today.
Any questions of Mr. Tejas? I know this has been a very long, detailed meeting, but the public is not privy to a lot of this information, and I think we had a good discussion, some good questions. I want to thank those that participated, and thank you, Mr. Tejas. There's a lot of detail in these projects, and we want to commend you for the job that you've been doing on this. This is a major project, and we know that you don't get a lot of support. Get a lot of moving pieces, so thank you for your efforts.
I appreciate that. Thank
With
you.
that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned at 10:37 a.m. Thank you.